Have you ever stopped to wonder whether you truly gave your children what really counts? Maybe you worked hard, made sacrifices, kept food on the table, ensured they got an education, and even offered them some extras along the way. And still, that lingering question remains, did I do enough? It's a quiet, persistent doubt that shadows many mothers and fathers in their 50s, 60s, and beyond. It doesn't come from guilt, but from love. A love that with age and reflection longs to understand what truly shapes a person. What builds a child's character, their emotional resilience, their sense of self. Sigmund Freud devoted his life to answering that very question. To him, childhood wasn't just a chapter. It was the very foundation upon which every adult life is built. He didn't speak in gentle terms. He believed a child's emotional world carves out the contours of the entire psyche, silently forming who they will become. But Freud wasn't only concerned with obvious pain or harsh trauma. He ventured deeper into the realm of what we now recognize as subtle emotional wounds, the kind that leave no physical trace but echo for decades through how a person loves, trusts, reacts, and relates. And the question he posed still stings today. Did I truly see my child for who they were? Or did I impose on them everything I once hoped to be? That's where the heart of the issue lies. So often, without realizing it, parents try to sculpt their children to heal their own past regrets. They want their child to follow the path they never could, behave in ways they themselves wish they had, live a version of life they believe would have been better. But in that pursuit to do the right thing, they unintentionally smother the very thing that matters most, their child's authentic identity. Freud believed one of the deepest wounds an adult carries is having only felt loved under certain conditions during childhood. Love that was doled out based on obedience performance or meeting expectations. Love that came attached to rules, comparisons, demands. And rather than making someone stronger, this conditional love weakens them. It damages, not builds. Even more unsettling, this kind of love often wears a disguise it hides behind concern. Parents may say they want the best for their children, but if the best is just a mirror of their own unfulfilled longings, then it's not love they're giving. It's projection. This video explores the one thing every child needs in order to grow into a healthy, whole adult. It's not a gift you can wrap. It's not an inheritance or some golden parenting formula. It's something you can't touch, but the heart feels it deeply to be seen and accepted as a person, not as a project. Freud believed that if a parent could offer this pure emotional grounding, it would equip a child to face life's hardships with strength and clarity. Because growing up with genuine recognition and acceptance forms the strongest shield against psychological pain. In this episode, we'll dive into 7 essential pillars that stem from this foundational act. We'll look at how comparison can crush a spirit, how emotional absence cuts deeper than physical distance, and how love, when entangled with guilt or pressure, can turn into a kind of prison. If your children are already grown, this isn't about regret. It's about awareness, seeing clearly now, with the benefit of hindsight, what may have once gone unnoticed. And most importantly, it's about knowing that it's not too late. There's still time. Time to reconnect, to speak, to welcome, to heal. Freud said that what we don't bring into the light of awareness doesn't just disappear, it returns disguised as fate. If you want to understand what truly shapes a child from within, and what can still be done when that foundation was never laid, stay with us. You might just discover that the greatest gift isn't behind you. It can still be given. Now, when it comes to parental love, many believe that as long as love was present, everything else falls into place. If I loved my child, then I did my job right. But Freud challenges that assumption. Love alone doesn't guarantee emotional well-being. The issue isn't in the love itself, it's in how that love is expressed. Freud observed that parents often don't love their children for who they really are, but for what they symbolize, an extension of themselves, a vessel for unfulfilled dreams, a reflection of their own identities. That's why so many children grow up not as their true selves, but as who they believe they must become to earn love. In the Freudian view, loving too much can be just as damaging as not loving enough. Because in this context, too much isn't about an overflow of affection. It's about a lack of healthy boundaries. It's love that invades, that smothers, that projects. When parents try to shield their children from every bit of pain, they end up blocking the child's path to resilience. When parents never say no, they raise kids who don't know how to cope with frustration. The opposite is just as harmful. When love is scarce, when warmth is missing, when there's no emotional connection, it leaves behind deep emotional wounds. Freud observed that children who don't feel emotionally seen or valued develop psychological defense mechanisms. These defenses can show up later in life as low self-esteem, compulsive behaviors, or an ongoing fear of abandonment. It's a delicate balance, one rarely achieved. And reaching it requires conscious awareness. It begins when a parent is willing to look inward first. Freud believed that we can only truly love our children once we've made peace with our own story. That means many of the parenting mistakes we make aren't really about intent. They're the result of unconscious repetition, playing out unresolved patterns from our own upbringing. Parents who were neglected often neglect. Parents who were emotionally smothered might repeat that smothering, mistaking it for care. And that's where the real danger lies. When love becomes distorted, it stops being nourishing and turns into something controlling, demanding, and conditional. The child grows up believing they must fit a certain mold in order to be loved. And if they can't, they feel like they've failed. To Freud, genuine love means accepting a child's individuality. It means allowing them to have their own thoughts, their own desires, even when those desires don't match your own. It's loving your child, even when they don't meet your expectations. But that's a tall order. In real life, many parents feel rejected when their child doesn't follow the path they imagined. What they call disappointment is often the frustration of seeing a reflection they didn't expect in the mirror their child holds up to them. Freud believed that children are keenly aware from a very early age of the type of love they're receiving. They can tell whether they're loved for who they are or for what they do. That distinction shapes their entire personality. A child who feels they have to earn love will carry that burden into every part of life, seeking approval at school, at work, and in their relationships. On the other hand, when love is offered with emotional presence, maturity, firmness, and respect for the other's boundaries, it plants the seeds for a future adult who knows how to love and be loved in a healthy way. So the question to ask isn't, did I love my child? The real questions are, how did I love them, under what conditions? What expectations came with it? What personal needs was I trying to fulfill? Acknowledging that you may have made mistakes in how you loved doesn't diminish the love you gave. Quite the opposite. It's this very recognition that paves the way for a new kind of relationship. One that's freer, truer, and more healing. Real love, as Freud reminds us, isn't measured by how much you protect or how much you give. It's measured by the freedom it allows, the sense of safety it builds, and the calm it leaves behind in the heart of the one receiving it. When people talk about inheritance, they usually think of money, houses, jewelry, or land. But Freud pointed to something far deeper and longer lasting. A legacy parents pass on that's invisible, intangible, but shapes a whole life emotional inheritance. That legacy begins to form in a child's earliest days through how they're welcomed, held, and listened to. Freud referred to this early bond as the foundation of the psyche. It's during this stage that the child lays the groundwork for their future identity. And what matters most in this process isn't what's said, it's what's communicated through actions, tone of voice, and the reliability of small, everyday gestures. A father who is emotionally distant, even if physically present, can pass down a legacy of insecurity. A mother who overprotects may unintentionally leave behind a legacy of fear. What's striking is that over time, many parents grow more focused on what they'll leave behind in material terms, a home, a car, a savings account, while losing sight of what they're already leaving day after day, how they make their children feel on the inside. Freud noticed that the emotional imprint children absorb from their parents stays with them long after those parents are gone. A father's gaze, a mother's response to tears, the silence in moments of pain, the subtle demands hidden in everyday comment. All these things become internal voices that follow the child through life. When a child grows up only being praised for saying yes, they carry a quiet shame every time they say no. And if their tears were met with silence or indifference, they eventually learn to bottle up their emotions, burying them so deep that they begin to surface as symptoms instead. That's why Freud was so firm in his belief that childhood is destiny. Not because it seals our fate forever, but because it sets a blueprint deep in the unconscious. And what remains in the dark tends to play on repeat until we shine a light on it. Many grown-ups today find themselves struggling with feelings they can't quite explain, fear of being abandoned, trouble trusting others, a constant urge to prove they're enough. And almost always, these patterns trace back to emotional imprints absorbed in early life, often without ever realizing it. But this inheritance isn't always a burden. When a child was met with warmth, even if things weren't perfect, when there was presence, attentive listening, and mutual respect, that experience becomes an inner reservoir of strength. It plants in the child a quiet sense of self-worth, safety, and the belief that they can meet life's challenges head-on. Parents who tune into their children's emotions, who acknowledge their pain instead of brushing it aside, who respond without mockery or scorn, those parents leave behind something invisible but powerful. They give their children the ability to trust themselves, to know their value doesn't hinge on achievements, and to feel like they belong in the world. Freud believed that the greatest gift a parent could offer was to help a child feel whole from the inside out. That only happens when a child is free to feel their feelings without fear of rejection, when mistakes don't come with shame, and when being different doesn't cost them their parents' love. That's the kind of legacy that can't be erased, split, or contested. It's carried in the way we walk, the way we love, in the quiet decisions we make every day. And if you suspect you passed down something harmful, take heart. There's still room for change. Freud had great faith in the power of working through the past. What's done can't be undone, but it can be understood, named, and reworked. And from that work, even late in life, new legacies can begin. Because children don't need flawless parents. They need ones who are real enough to see what they gave and what they didn't. Freud spent much of his life studying the emotional terrain of childhood. And throughout his writings, one message shows up again and again: every child needs to be seen. It's not just about showing up physically, it's about seeing the child as a whole person with real thoughts, real fears, real desires and emotions that matter. To Freud, this kind of recognition is what builds a healthy mind. But often family life heads in a different direction. Instead of seeing their children as they are, many parents see them as they wish they were. They try to mold them into a mirror image of their own ideal. And in that effort, the child's real self starts to fade. Freud had a name for this parental narcissism. It's when love is tied to performance, when affection is handed out based on how well the child meets expectations. If the child behaves, gets good grades, fits the family mold, they're praised. But if they speak up about discomfort, act differently, or resist the role assigned to them, they're scolded, ignored, or labeled as difficult. This creates a painful bind inside the child. They begin to realize that in order to be loved, they have to adapt. That means hiding parts of themselves, stuffing down emotions, even pretending to be someone they're not. Over time, they lose their own reflection. That's why Freud was so insistent the one thing a child needs most is to be truly seen and still accepted. This doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It doesn't mean giving in to every demand. It simply means that even in the middle of conflict, the child knows they are still worthy of love. That kind of knowing changes everything. A child who's accepted for who they are becomes an adult who feels grounded, creative, and capable of forming healthy bonds. They don't twist themselves into knots to earn approval because they've learned early on that their value isn't up for debate. On the other hand, a child who was constantly shaped and sculpted, who was loved only when they checked all the boxes, often grows into an adult riddled with anxiety and self-doubt. They can't tell where their true self ends and where others' expectations begin because they've spent a lifetime trying to be what others wanted. Freud saw this with great clarity. For him, many emotional wounds could be traced back to that early loss of self. When love hinges on performance, the child learns to lie, not just to others, but to themselves. They build a life that looks right, even if it doesn't feel right. That's why, especially now that our children are grown, the most honest question a parent can ask is not, "What did I give them?" but "Did I truly see them? Did I allow them to be themselves?" Because in the end, what stays with a child for life isn't the rules or the rewards. It's the felt memory of being welcomed just as they were. If you ever let your child cry without shaming them, if you allowed them to say something odd without jumping in to correct it right away, if you sat with them in their fear instead of silencing them with a quick hush, then know this: even if you made mistakes elsewhere, you gave them something rare and powerful. You gave them a foundation that most people never receive. But if that wasn't the case, if today you realize you couldn't offer those things, don't let that fill you with regret. Becoming aware is already a turning point, because the child you once had still lives inside the adult they've become. And when a parent, even years later, opens their heart and truly sees what was missing, something begins to shift. This is what every child longs for, and also what's hardest to give. Because to truly see someone else, we first have to summon the courage to look inside ourselves. Among all the quiet mistakes that slip into parenting, there's one that Freud looked at with particular care: the habit of comparison. It doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't leave bruises, but it quietly chips away at a child's sense of self. It sounds harmless enough. Your sister always took responsibility, or, at your age, I already had a job. But words like these, repeated over the years, don't just fade into the background. According to Freud, they lodge themselves deep inside, creating what he called a narcissistic wound, a cut to the core of the self. When we compare, we usually mean well. We're trying to guide, to motivate, to offer an example. But a child doesn't hear our intent. All they absorb is the hidden message, "I'm not good enough." That quiet thought settles in their unconscious, and before long they begin to see themselves as flawed. They can't quite figure out why they always seem to fall short, but they start measuring themselves against everyone else anyway. And slowly, their ego, their inner anchor begins to weaken. They stop trusting their own instincts, their natural impulses, their honest wants. They learn to reshape themselves just to be accepted, or at least not rejected. Freud warned that comparing siblings can sow deep seeds of rivalry and resentment. Even if you never meant harm, the child feels like they're locked in a race they can't win because the rules are unclear and someone else always seems to come out ahead. Many adults who wrestle with envy, low self-esteem, or crippling perfectionism were once children silently judged and weighed against others. And the saddest part, those same adults often turn into their own harshest critics. They keep comparing themselves to coworkers, to friends, to strangers, as though they're standing trial in an invisible courtroom, where no effort is ever enough. Freud called this internal process the introjection of the critical parent. The voice that once belonged to mom or dad now lives inside them, speaking up in every new beginning, every relationship, every fragile hope. But comparison doesn't just wound emotionally, it shapes identity itself. Children who grow up being compared start to question who they really are. They doubt their choices. They wonder if they're truly lovable, not for how they perform, but for what they feel. And when they grow into adulthood, they often carry a quiet emptiness. They can't always name what they want, because they never learned how to desire without fear. They feel off balance, out of place, like they owe the world an apology just for being themselves. Freud's greatest insight here is simple but profound. No comparison is ever neutral. Each one diminishes a child. It blinds us to who they are by forcing them to fit a mold that was never theirs to begin with. Real love, the kind that builds someone up, doesn't rank or measure. It sees difference without turning it into a hierarchy. It understands that every child grows at their own pace, feels with their own heart, learns in their own rhythm, and expresses in their own way. Comparison doesn't teach, it oppresses. It doesn't lift, it belittles. And if as a parent you've leaned on this habit, maybe because it was what you knew or what was done to you, know this: you still have time to mend what matters. Owning the mistake is a powerful step. Saying to your grown child, "I now realize you were simply different, and that wasn't a flaw," can begin to heal what's been broken. Because in the end, every child longs to hear just one thing: that they were loved for being exactly who they were not, for chasing some version of themselves they could never become. Freud believed that emotional absence is one of childhood's deepest wounds. And the cruel irony is, it can happen even when the parent is right there in the room. Being in the house isn't the same as being truly present. A sensitive child can always tell when something's off. They notice when dad is in the room, but miles away in thought, or when mom nods as they speak, but her eyes are somewhere else. Presence to a child isn't about being in the same space. It's about being felt. So many adults today who feel overlooked in their relationships were once little ones who were never truly seen. Freud had a name for this kind of subtle hurt, hidden emotional absence. It's a quiet form of emotional neglect. And no, It doesn't mean those parents didn't love their kids. Most were simply overwhelmed, caught up in their own hardships, just trying to make it through the day. But children don't know how to read circumstances. They only know how to feel. And what they feel in these moments is abandonment. It's the silence they hear when they're in pain. It's the hurried "uh-huh" when they ask something that matters to them. It's the glance that glides right past them, as if they weren't there. Over time, these tiny moments pile up. They become a hidden blueprint in the child's emotional world, one where love feels out of reach, unreliable, or just never enough. Freud noticed that children who aren't truly listened to tend to grow up carrying a hunger for affection they can't quite name. They seek approval, recognition, and comfort, but always from the outside, rarely from within. And often they don't even know why. This kind of emotional absence also chips away at a child's ability to trust the grown-ups around them. How can you lean on someone when the person who was supposed to be your safe harbor felt cold, distracted, or forever preoccupied? The child begins to learn that just because someone is physically close doesn't mean they're emotionally there. That lesson sticks. It becomes a kind of inner guardrail, a constant watchfulness, a hesitation to open up an emotional wall built brick by brick. That's why many grown-ups today feel a haunting kind of loneliness, even when they're not alone. It's not a flaw in who they are. It's the result of growing up in a world where the only thing that felt dependable was being left to face things on their own. Freud was clear from the earliest years human beings need to feel emotionally met, a caring glance when they cry, a few words that name their frustration, a hug that doesn't just soothe, but says, "I'm here. I see you." When those things are missing, they leave a hole, and that hole doesn't go away with age. People try to fill it with lopsided relationships, overconsumption, or the endless chase for approval. But the cruel thing about emotional absence is how hard it is to point to. Unlike shouting or hitting, it doesn't leave marks. It's a quiet ache, one that even the child can't quite explain. They just grow up carrying a vague emptiness, a feeling of not fitting in, not belonging anywhere. It's why so many parents are stunned when their adult children one day say, "I felt alone as a kid." The parent protests. "But I was always home," and they were, but not in the way their child most needed. Freud taught that being there physically isn't enough. What children crave is emotional presence, real engagement, honest interest. And the good news, that kind of presence doesn't require hours of your time or grand gestures. Sometimes all it takes is a few minutes of sincere attention, a moment of listening without judgment, a word of validation that isn't rushed. If you're realizing now that you couldn't be as present as you wanted to be, that recognition isn't a life sentence. Absence can be answered with presence, starting today. A real conversation, a heartfelt apology, a small act of care. These are the building blocks of reconnection, even if the bond once seemed beyond repair. Because as Freud reminded us, what heals isn't what happened. It's what we choose to do once we finally understand it. And every child deep down, no matter how late it comes, long for that. To feel that even after the delays and missteps, love still has a way of reaching them. Among the most delicate and tangled emotions between parents and children is something Freud called introjected guilt. It's a quiet kind of emotional prison that begins in childhood but can last well into adulthood. It usually starts with love, genuine sacrificial love. Many parents give everything they have, their energy, their dreams, their comfort. They take on more than they can bear, push through exhaustion, and make hard choices all for their children. And it's done from the heart. But if this love isn't understood or handled with care, it can slowly turn into pressure. You hear it in words like, "After all I've done for you," or "You're the only reason I kept going," or even "If it weren't for you, my life would have turned out so differently." At first, these may sound like statements of devotion, but Freud warned us to look deeper. Beneath those words can lie a subtle demand that the child repay the emotional debt, that they live in response to their parents' sacrifices. So the child grows up carrying a sense that they owe something, that love must be earned back, that they have to balance the scales. But this isn't love. It's love with strings. Love that must be returned, matched, justified. Freud saw in many of his patients how deeply this kind of guilt could run. Adults who struggled to speak up for themselves, who couldn't break away from family expectations, who avoided big decisions or bold steps afraid of hurting the very people who once gave them everything. This kind of attachment doesn't set a child free, it ties them down. They grow up feeling like there's no room to make mistakes, no space to explore or disagree. Instead of learning to think for themselves, they learn to meet expectations. Obedience becomes confused with love. And in that confusion, something essential is lost, their sense of self. Love, instead of being a source of warmth, becomes a quiet burden. Freud called this a neurotic form of love, a kind that isn't offered freely, but comes with hidden contracts, unspoken demands, emotional debts. It's not love that welcomes, it's love that watches. Not a hand that guides, but a grip that controls. Not a source of inspiration, but a cage. To a child, this is a bewildering world. How do you love someone who constantly makes you feel like you owe them something? How do you trust a bond that always comes with a price tag that keeps reminding you of how much it cost? And so they grow up and carry that same blueprint into their adult relationships. They give too much, ask for too little silence, their needs, and run from conflict. And often without realizing it, they start to expect that same quiet loyalty from others, the same silent loyalty once demanded of them. The truth is, Freud believed love only fulfills its purpose when it grants freedom, not when it insists on obligation. Loving a child means creating the space for them to leave, not the pressure to stay. It means holding a connection that doesn't depend on constant presence or lifelong gratitude. It's built on the quiet confidence that what's been given will endure even across time, even across distance. Yet many parents confuse gratitude with obedience. They expect their children to act as extensions of themselves, to make the same choices to suppress their own desires in the name of family loyalty. But Freud reminded us real loyalty only emerges when someone has the freedom to walk away without guilt. And if today, looking back, you can see ways in which you used love to ask for something in return, even unknowingly know that it's not too late to change that story. A heartfelt apology, a moment of emotional release, or even a simple phrase spoken with sincerity like, "You don't owe me anything," can begin to unravel years of quiet guilt. And if you're the child who grew up carrying that weight, there's something you need to understand too. The love that once bound you doesn't belong to you to carry forever. You have the right to say gently, clearly, that you want to love without guilt, that you want to show up without losing yourself, that you're done living as if you owe a debt that was never yours to begin with. Because, as Freud taught, real love makes no demands. It offers room to breathe, to be whole, to stand freely in your own being. Maybe some of this has stirred something in you. Perhaps it's brought to mind certain words, gestures, or silences, moments, when you truly believed you were doing your best. But now, with time and distance, you realize something was missing. That realization can sting. But Freud believed that the pain of awareness is far lighter than the pain of repeating the same unconscious patterns over and over. In other words, acknowledging where you went wrong isn't a sentence, it's a doorway to release. The real tragedy isn't making mistakes with your children. It's letting fear or pride keep you from facing them. It's clinging to the belief that what's done is done. Because Freud showed us that the past doesn't vanish. It echoes. It hides. It shows up in symptoms. Still, here's the powerful truth. Emotional healing is possible. It doesn't matter how many years have gone by. A child, even a grown one, can be deeply moved by hearing their parent say, "Now I understand. I see it clearly today. I'm sorry I couldn't give you what you needed back then." Those words won't erase the past, but they open a door to something new. They ease guilt. They soften resentment. They build bridges where there were once walls. Freud believed that the unconscious mind responds to sincerity. Even when a relationship seems distant or frayed, there's still a part of the child, no matter their age, that longs to be seen, held, and accepted. They might not say it. They might deny it. They might act like it doesn't matter. But it does. And if you've never had the chance to offer your child the unconditional recognition that Freud saw as essential, take heart. The chance is still there. Sometimes all it takes is a conversation to open the door again, a simple shift in perspective, a warm hug without strings attached, or just listening with an open heart. These seemingly small gestures carry extraordinary weight when they come from a place of truth. And if reaching out physically isn't possible anymore, maybe your child has moved far away, or maybe they've left your life altogether. You can still take this step within yourself. Speak it out loud. Write it down. Sit with it in quiet thought. Make peace with that part of you that tried so hard to get it right, even if you didn't always know how. Because deep down, every parent carries the hope that they gave their best. And most of the time, they did exactly that with the tools they had, with the pain they bore, shaped by the examples passed down to them. This isn't about placing blame on the past. It's about choosing what can still be built from its remains. Freud reminded us that no human bond is ever set in stone. Every connection holds the possibility of change if we're brave enough to face it, feel it, and embrace the truths that may be hard to bear. The comforting truth is this: even when they've been wounded, children don't forget the genuine moments of love. In the moment, they may stay silent, respond with coldness, or resist. But in their hearts, something takes root. That tiny seed of reconnection waits beneath the surface. And with time, it grows. So at the close of all this reflection, perhaps the real question isn't, "What did I do wrong?" A far more meaningful question might be, "With the awareness I have today, what can I give?" And only you can answer that. It might be as simple as picking up the phone saying, "I love you," with no rush, asking, "How are you?" and truly meaning it. It might be telling them, "I'm not trying to change you anymore. I just want to understand you." Or maybe it's the quiet presence of someone who finally understands that loving isn't about shaping another person. It's about letting them be fully themselves. And for a child, that's the one thing they've always needed most. Before you go, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for sitting with these truths, and for opening your heart to the kind of healing that doesn't come easy. If something in today's message stirred something in you, maybe an old memory, a quiet ache, or a sudden clarity, I hope you know you're not alone. We're all carrying something. And the miracle is that we don't have to carry it the same way forever. And if that speaks to your soul, if it gives you hope, or helps you breathe a little easier, then I invite you to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like if it meant something to you. It helps more than you know. And share it with someone you love, someone who might need this reminder too. Until next time, may peace find you, may healing walk beside you, and may love, real love, give you the space to be exactly who you are. See you soon.